Welcome, everyone. Seeing some familiar names, that's great. We're about a minute in and we're just going to get started. First of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Gregory Chen, and I'm the policy lead at CGAP, and I'm going to be moderating through this session. And we have 3 guest speakers, and I'm going to introduce them shortly, but first I wanted to set a little bit of context before we get going. One is that G2P, or government-to-person social payments, are a vital part of modernizing many economies. And this is around the world, but we're particularly keen and focused here on Africa. And it's going to be important that while Africa is going to develop in the decades ahead, that it develop modern G2P social payment systems, because there are going to be pockets of vulnerability due to climate change, dislocation, and pockets of conflict. The good news is that there are quite a few innovations happening on the African continent, and we're going to be highlighting some of those innovations here today that are extremely exciting. And in particular, we're going to focus on innovations coming out of Togo, Zambia, and Kenya. The format is we're going to be here for about an hour and 15 minutes, so till 15 minutes after the hour. And we've really broken this up into 3 segments. The first segment will be a question and answer session from me to our 3 guest speakers on each of the 3 different countries. That will go for about 20 minutes. Then there's going to be a set of breakout groups, and you'll have the option to go into those. Those breakout groups will provide you a chance to ask questions, to make observations, and those observations will be distilled back to the wider group. And we'll finish with about 20 more minutes with our guest speakers, where they'll address quite a few of your observations and questions. So it's really into those 3 sections. Again, it's going till 15 minutes after the hour. Before we get going, another comment just on the logistics. We are not going to be doing a lot of presentations today, so we hope you find that to be a more engaging format. We're going to be more in a Q&A with our guest speakers. That does provide, while the microphones are going to be muted during the larger group, you will have a chance to speak in the breakout sessions. And during the whole webinar, we encourage people who are interested to put their observations up to the group chat and to put your questions there as well. And we'll try and respond to some of those in the chat. And a final sort of logistical point is that the webinar is being recorded. So we'll have a chance to replay it, and you'll have the chance to share it as well with anybody who might be interested to hear this. So we're going to move into the introduction of our speakers in each of the countries. And we're going to begin with Togo. And Togo is fascinating. For the past year since the pandemic began, it's launched a program that's had several phases called Novisi. And this targets informal workers, and it targets more women than men, and interestingly, pays a bit more for women than for men. And there are many interesting parts about this, but we featured here on this slide that there is a very creative use of household surveys, satellite imagery, phone survey, and telecom metadata to improve the targeting of this program for informal workers. To speak about Togo, we have Kafui Ekuhoho, who is a senior project manager at the Ministry of Digital Economy in Togo. She leads on the implementation of the Novisi program. In addition to that responsibility, she's involved with the West Africa Unique Identification Project, which aims to create a unique digital ID for all people in Togo by 2025. And Ms. Ekuhoho has a background in fintech and ag tech, including having run an electronic payment wallet for delivering agricultural subsidies in Nigeria and Liberia. So we're delighted to have Ms. Ekohoho here to speak about Togo. And so I'm going to start her off with the question. Ms. Ekohoho, Novisi has moved quickly to deliver digitally and to use data for better targeting. What drove Togo to make these changes so quickly?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chen. So to set a bit of the context, when the pandemic hit us in Togo in March 2020, the government of Togo were faced with a challenge, which is how to prevent the rise in national poverty that could be triggered by the restrictive measures being put into place. Because 80% of our workforces work in the informal sector and lives on the basis of daily revenues. So by telling the population to stay at home and not to go out, is actually a way to deprive them with the daily revenue. It's like we are telling them, okay, don't go out, either you catch COVID, but you stay at home, but you are going to die of hunger because you are not having any revenues. So the president of Togo decided that the best way to address that situation and to prevent people to fall back into extreme poverty that they have been lifted out is to send them some cash to supplement the loss of income. So within the context of the crisis where people can't go out or gather, the Ministry of Digital Economy has within 10 days developed 100% digital solution that leverages on data and USSD technology to enroll, identify vulnerable people, and to transfer them cash all digitally. There is no need to go and meet people because COVID rules are applying. So the vulnerable people in our case, which were informal workers living in confined area, were identified by leveraging on the voter ID database, which was the most widespread and up-to-date biometric ID at our disposal then. That database provided us with information on applicant eligibility, which is mostly their profession, were they an informal workers or not. And they were also providing us information about the location, were they living in a confined area or not. So, that was actually the very beginning. But as we were moving forward, the government really wanted to be sure that cash goes out to the most vulnerable people if ever the whole country were to be confined, because we have like up to 397 cantons. So if we had to kind of disburse cash to all those people, all those 80% of people living on those 397 cantons, that would have been too much. So we needed to find another methodology to kind of I will say target the most vulnerable people. So that's how the Togo government has reached out to University of Berkeley and the Innovation for Poverty Action to kind of build the poverty map of Togo, leveraging on data such as satellite imagery, phone surveys data, and the data consumptions, a set of data to kind of come up with the poverty map of Togo and determining who is the poorest based on the consumption level. And that model is currently being used in a program funded by an American NGO called Give Directly, which is called Give Direct Novisi. So for Give Direct Novisi, vulnerable people, they are being targeted based actually on that model using satellite imagery and consumptions data. So how it works basically is like the people have to enroll, dial in an USSD code, *855# and by dialing the USSD codes, they provide a set of basic information like their name, their surname, and their ID, because we need to be able to uniquely identify them so that we don't pay somebody more than once, actually. And then we also needed to know their gender because we give more cash to women. And we were doing that by leveraging on the voters ID database and by the algorithm developed by University of Berkeley in the case of Give Direct Novice program. And once they have filled in the form on the USSD code, they are immediately paid because eligibility is determined instantly and they are immediately paid, whether based on if they are poor enough and if they are men or a woman. And as of today, as we're speaking today, Novice, the platform, the whole system, has disbursed more than $24 million to more than 900,000 beneficiaries.
Well, fascinating. So so people enroll digitally, and from the survey, comparing it with the satellite and the telecom data, you're able to screen a little bit better targeting. So you've served 900,000, but I'm assuming you had more people apply than that. So you had to say some were eligible, some were not. Is that right?
Exactly.
And so how many applications did you get and how did you screen it down to 900,000? It was many more, I suppose, applied.
Exactly. So overall, we got like more than 1.6 million applications. And then currently, one thing I will say for Novice program, because the Novice platform, the technical platform managing enrollment is powering 2 programs, and various programs have different rules of eligibility. So in the case of Novice, the program funded by the state, when people enroll, they give us the ID number. And then from that ID number, because the ID number is connected to the database, we know if they are informal workers and we know if they live in a confined area. So by the time they enroll on the USSD form, it's a USSD form with close to 5 questions, just 5 little questions where you put your ID, you put your name and surname, and you put a kind of a secret code number that is on the ID so that we are sure that you are the real owner of the ID. So you put that secret code, and the system is interconnected with the voters ID database, which give us information about if you are a woman or if you're a man, which give us information about if you are an informal worker or if you are not, and which also give us an information on where you live. And if you are an informal worker, and then if you live in a confined area, and then if you are a woman or a man, you are eligible, and then we give you the amount of money. That's for Novice, the program funded by the state. But then you have the other program funded by the NGO, the American NGO Give Directly, where they were disbursing cash to the most vulnerable people in the 200 poorest canton. So there we kind of use the poverty map of Togo that has been built using satellite imagery and the phone service data. So we classify them. We have the 200 poorest cantons in Togo. So, and then the eligibility criteria for those people were to have an income that is less than $1.26 for the NGO powered program. So for everybody registering from the 200 poorest cantons in Togo and who earns less than $1.26 a day, we give them cash. So the principle is the same. When the person registers with the voter ID is capable of telling us in which location they are. So we know that, okay, they live in the 200 cantons. And by using AI, artificial intelligence, we are able to determine if that person earns more or have more than $1.26 a day or not. We have the whole algorithm built on, which runs on the background, and that's how eligibility is determined.
So I have some more questions for you, which I may save for the last session about the future, but one last question before we move on to Zambia. And that is, how are the payments once you're eligible? And it seems that you have a high confidence that the targeting is good. Once someone is eligible, how does the payment get sent and received by the 900,000 recipients? What's the system you're using?
Exactly. So the payment is made digitally. So the Novice platform, you know, the platform powering the program is connected to mobile money. You know, it's connected to the APIs of mobile money operators. So once you remember, you register with an USSD platform. So you have your phone, your feature phone, you dial the number and you register. So the platform knows your phone number, and the platform knows which operator, if you have a digital wallet from operator A or operator B. So he knows your phone number. So once you are eligible, the money is automatically sent to your mobile wallet. And if you didn't have a mobile wallet, the mobile wallet is automatically created for you.
Okay. That's fascinating. I mean, such an amount of innovation there. We're going to come back and we have some more questions for you, but we're going to move on and to Zambia next. And thank you. On Zambia, there is the Girls Education and Women's Empowerment and Livelihoods Project. The acronym is JEWEL. It's a wonderful name. It had a first phase from 2016 to 2020, and we're just entering its second phase. And I think it's safe to say it's been a success in achieving many of its objectives. To talk about the program, and one of the key features of the program is that it provides choice for recipients across 6 different providers, which is what the graphic on the screen suggests. To talk about this, we have Emma Wadey Hobson, who is a senior social protection specialist at the World Bank. And she's the manager from the World Bank side for the implementation of this program in Zambia, and she's based in Lusaka. Emma's background is in social safety nets, social protection delivery systems, productive inclusion and jobs. And before the bank, Emma worked at USAID in Ethiopia on a $2.4 billion productive social safety net program. And she's also worked before at the European Commission, UNDP, the United.
You're muted, Greg.
Okay, I'm muted now. Okay, am I back? Okay. So Emma, in Zambia, it's been, you've been at this now for 5 years or more. Why did the government in Zambia choose to use 6 different providers? And what have been the challenges and benefits of this approach?
Good afternoon, Greg, and everyone. Yeah, so I mean, the simple answer to why the government in Zambia chose to use 6 providers is because no one provider could serve all areas of the country. So when the program was being designed, the bank partnered with the Bank of Zambia, the World Bank partnered with the Bank of Zambia to do a digital payments assessment. And that assessment showed that given how sparsely populated Zambia is, there is no one digital payment provider that really covers the whole country. And there wasn't centrally the knowledge of which areas of the country were served by which payment service provider, particularly once you get to the community level. There wasn't kind of that knowledge. So the solution that was then developed was a multi-service provider system with beneficiary choice. So basically, government enters into agreements with each and every payment service provider that is interested to participate in the program and provide payments. So all of them are selected, provided that they are regulated by the Bank of Zambia and offer payment services. And the allocation of beneficiaries to them is actually done based on the beneficiary's own choice, rather than the program, allocating beneficiaries to PSPs when we don't know which access points are closest to the beneficiaries, etc. In terms of the challenges, I would say this approach takes a lot of time and effort investment. So the program has to invest a lot in relationships with the 6 PSPs and day-to-day working with them on sensitizing beneficiaries on the options they have, enrolling the beneficiaries with the different payment providers, etc. So, for example, the program actually has a monthly meeting with all the payment service providers where the program gives information of which payments are going to be going out and when. And then those PSPs can work with their district level offices and agents and together with the government district teams to provide sensitization to those beneficiaries on the products that they can offer the beneficiary and enabling that beneficiary to make the choice. So it takes a lot of work to get all that done and kind of record the beneficiary choice in the payment system and then enroll them also given the KYC requirements of the different PSPs. The other challenge is the low levels of financial literacy among the beneficiaries themselves and the need for sensitization. So we found, for example, that in the first year of the program, only 50% of beneficiaries stated that they know they have a choice of PSP. Only a third of them could name an alternative PSP. But by the third year of the program, given all this investment in sensitization, over 70% of beneficiaries knew they had choice and over 2/3 of them could name an alternative PSP to the one that they chose. But we would say that the benefits outweigh the challenges because we see that this beneficiary choice, even though it arose out of necessity, we now see the benefits of it. So for beneficiaries, we see that they choose the payment service provider that is closest to them. So they tell us that they chose the PSP based on the proximity of the access point to them, which is information that wasn't available centrally to the program. For the ministry and the program, this approach avoids very lengthy procurement processes, which often take years, given that government actually enters into agreements with all the payment service providers. So there isn't a whole competitive bidding process, evaluations, etc. It also avoids vendor lock-in for government, where, for example, when one of the dual payment service providers went into liquidation, Zampost, the program was very easy for the program to adapt because those beneficiaries were just asked to choose an alternative provider. And finally, it benefits the whole ecosystem where this level of competition actually generates better customer service to beneficiaries and generates more penetration in the rural areas and more targeting of the poor and avoids reinforcing the existing monopolies. So any payment service providers that are interested to come in and go out of their way to provide these services to the poor can do so. And therefore, we don't continue with the same kind of monopolies that are in place.
It's a fantastic story, Emma. And clearly there's been a learning process. It's gotten better over time. There are challenges. It adds layers of complexity, but on balance, over a reform process, Zambia at least has felt it's beneficial. Quickly, we'll go into it maybe more later on, but are there plans to expand this? This is only one program, the Jewel program. Are there discussions underway to expand it to other G2P or social assistance payments in Zambia?
Yes, so for the Jewel program, so far it's been 75,000 women that have received their livelihoods grant payments through this choice-based system. But government has now seen the benefits of the system and is now putting it in place for its much larger social cash transfer program. So the social cash transfer program has about 750,000 households, so about 10 times the size of Jewel. And the target is to also use beneficiary choice, at least in the urban and peri-urban areas that have mobile connectivity. So the target is to try and reach about half of that caseload, 750,000, by 2022. And obviously, as we see connectivity and mobile penetration improving in Zambia, you know, those percentages can be improved. So the World Bank is actually working with government also on putting in place this beneficiary choice-based system within the larger social cash transfer. But obviously, every program has its own challenges and specificities. So for the social cash transfer, the safety net payments are much smaller. So it's about $15 bi-monthly that the beneficiaries get. Compared with the Jewel grant, which is about $100 times 2 tranches. So while for Jewel, the beneficiaries, even in the remote areas, they're still using the digital payments because the cost benefit, you know, calculation for them makes sense. Even if they have to travel 3 hours or 4 hours for a $100 payment twice as a one-off, they will do it. But for a $15 payment every 2 months, you know, they're probably not going to, you know, it doesn't make sense to travel from a very remote area. And that's why we're starting with the areas with connectivity and urban, peri-urban areas particularly. The other challenge will be whether those beneficiaries have mobile phones or not. So for Jewel, we do provide a mobile phone to the women because it's kind of part of the whole livelihoods of financial inclusion approach. For the social cash transfer, we'll have to kind of do an exercise of registering, you know, who already has a phone. And then for those who don't, we'll have to perhaps think of also providing the phone. So that's another challenge we're thinking about now.
So thank you, Emma. We're going to come back, and this question of mobile phones and coverage also came up in the Novisi discussion. So let's move on to Kenya. And you know, Kenya's got its largest GDP program is called Inua Jamii. It has several different components, but to summarize it, it focuses on vulnerable groups: the elderly, youth, disabled, and the current stage of reform or phase of reform has been you know, almost the last 9 or 10 years. So it's been at this for quite a while, and there are perhaps 3 things to highlight here. One is that they've procured 4 different banks to deliver. Customers, like in Zambia, can choose among these 4. And there is a tiered fee system where the government pays more fees for the banks the further they go into rural areas. We are fortunate to have Victor Malu of the Financial Sector Deepening Kenya, which is a nonprofit that works on financial system development in Kenya. And Victor is a senior advisor at FSDK, and he works on project investments and relationships with the private sector, the nonprofit sector, and with government. And Victor's been involved from FSDK's side with the government of Kenya in the reforms that we're going to talk about here. So Victor, why did Kenya arrive at customer choice among 4 banks and this tiered fee system over quite a number of years of reform? Why did Kenya go this route?
Thank you very much, Gregory. In terms of the process that Kenya took to arrive at the 4 banks, first, I would just want to state that we did not choose to go with 4 banks. We had estimated that we might require about 5 banks based on the number that we had of about 1.5 million beneficiaries. We felt 300,000 beneficiaries would be a good figure for a bank to invest in the equipment that we required, biometric readers and biometric enabled cards as well. So the original figure we had was roughly 5 banks. Kenya has 42 banks. So this was, I would say, a small number, but we also wanted the 5 banks to be able to have a footprint across the whole country. So we had some specific requirements that we felt those banks should possess. Why did we move to a choice model? Before this model, we had a bank-led model based on prepaid cards, but it was the government, or it was the government that selected the bank. So they would say, for disabled people, this is, these 300,000 people, for example, you have to open an account with this particular bank. And if that bank did not have a pay point in your village, for example, then you would have to travel to the next village to get paid. And we felt this was very inconvenient, and it was also costly for the beneficiaries. So we wanted to change the dynamics of the process and have the beneficiary decide where they want to get paid. So we went through a procurement process with government. We supported them, where they were able to select these 4 banks. And what was, I would say, very innovative about these contracts was they had no figures. I mean, before you'd be told this program has 300,000 beneficiaries, but in this case, it was you will pay as many people as will come to you. So we called it a beauty contest. The banks would go display, put up their tents, and say, we have been contracted by government to pay you. And then they'll be told, okay, you choose among those 4 banks, the one that you want to pay you. So that was the first thing. The second thing was about costs, because the banks used to be paid, I would call it ad valorem. They'll be given their total amount and then they'll be given a fee. But we wanted to change the model so that they would be paid only when they paid a beneficiary. So they had to make sure that they opened a bank account, which was another change that we introduced. And then after opening the bank account, they had to collect the biometrics, issue a biometric-enabled card, and then only get paid when they delivered an actual payment. So that, again, was to enable the straight-through process to make sure that these payments were actually reaching the intended beneficiaries. The third thing that we wanted was to make sure that our beneficiaries were treated with dignity and respect. And as long as the banks knew that the main person they needed to please was the government, they would not take the beneficiary seriously. But with this choice model, where the beneficiary chooses where they want the account to be, and also they can switch annually. So they know the bank also knows, if I don't treat this beneficiary well, they have the option to walk away and open this account at no cost to them with one of my competitors. So the introduction of competition, we also felt was critical in order to drive prices down, but also improve the service that was being provided to these beneficiaries. So it was a deliberate effort, and so far we feel it has paid off. It has worked out very well.
So I think you've covered a lot there and some common themes. I mean, interestingly, you got to choice in a slightly different arrangement from Zambia. Zambia has an arrangement with each of the 6 providers, but in the case of Kenya, you went through a procurement process and just suggests that there are different ways to get to a similar outcome. Can you just quickly comment on the biometrics, Victor? And before we go to the breakout group, this program does have a biometric verification every 6 months that the banks undertake on the beneficiaries. Can you just explain why the government wanted that as part of the program?
Yes, so in this program or in these programs, one of the challenges is, beneficiaries will pass on, especially with the elderly, and there's a need to replace those beneficiaries. And unfortunately, usually there's not much incentive on the part of the families of the deceased to report these cases. So what we designed into this program was a proof of life process, where every time, or at least a beneficiary has to make one biometric transaction every 6 months through the bank or the financial service provider, so that they can then send that information back to government, and the government knows that this beneficiary is alive. If they do not receive this proof of life through the biometrics, which have what we call aliveness, then they will stop payments into that account until this proof of life is submitted by the bank. So this is a way of making sure that beneficiaries who are collecting funds are alive, and if they are not, then they can be replaced, they can be removed, and and other beneficiaries can come in and take advantage of this process. Maybe I could comment on the tiered fees. You had mentioned that as well. So what we felt was that if we paid one price across the board, then the financial service providers would concentrate only on the towns, for example, where it is cheaper to provide these financial services. So what we did is we came up with a tiered process where we zoned the country, and we used a number of indicators. One was economic activity, the other one was population, the third one was infrastructure, and the fourth one, which we found to be quite critical, was the distance to the nearest branch. And then based on that, we developed a matrix where we were able to come up with a tariff that then was implemented. So if a bank has customers who are in a remote region, then per payment, they earn a higher fee than someone who is only serving beneficiaries in a very well-developed urban setting, where we know the cost of delivery is much lower. So this was to incentivize the financial service providers to also attack some of the more remote locations in Kenya.
So just fantastic alignment of the government fee system with the incentives of the providers. So instead of a blanket fee, just much more thoughtful, only on receipt of the payment and paying more for rural areas. I think important to say, the Inua Jamii digital payments doesn't go to all of Kenya, but it does go to remote parts. There are some parts where you have to rely on traditional, more traditional analog cash delivery methods. So we're going to transition here to the breakout groups. And just as a reminder, this is going to be a moderated session, but it's a chance for all of the participants to choose one of 4 groups. And just to say, each of the 4 groups will be talking about all 3 countries. There's no special topics in any of the 4 groups. They'll all be the same. So please feel free to pick which one you want. It'll be random. There's no design there. There is one option for people who want to do the breakout group in French. So one of the 4 will be in French. And so if you would rather speak in French, please do join that group. So we'll go in for 15 minutes, and your moderator in each of those groups will introduce themselves and kick things off. So Daniel, if we could go over to the breakout groups now. I'm sorry. So Daniel, is the plenary back to the,
Yep.
to the main room? We're all back. Great.
Everyone's back.
Okay. So we have a little less time than we had planned. So I'm going to ask the rapporteurs from the different groups to quickly highlight the issues and questions raised in their group. And I'm going to begin with Johan Rust, and go from there to Marjorie, Arisha, and Ms. Buali.
Yeah, thanks. Good discussion in our group, Greg. One of the good questions we had was around security. So I think Francesco from our group highlighted the tension between the urgency with creating new programs and enrolling more beneficiaries. But then how do you safeguard security under such conditions, particularly around the biometric database quality is often an issue. Very curious to hear from the different programs around maybe some of the problems they faced and how they solved them. Khurram raised an interesting one around the sponsor bank. What kind of, do they work with sponsor banks in these markets, and what kind of responsibilities are offloaded to the sponsor banks, and how do they integrate with maybe some more customer-facing banks if they don't deal with them themselves? Any thoughts on that? We had 2 questions around cost. So how are recipients being guaranteed frictionless interaction with their digital payments? Are they having to pay to extract their money in the form of a cash out? So that's one question. We had a question about procurement as well. Michelle from CGAP asked maybe some of the other markets if they could talk a little bit about how they manage their procurement issues. And finally, we had two respondents, Martin and Luz, asking about, there wasn't much talk about a financial inclusion payoff to any of this. So were some of these ideas still part of this, or were they sidelined for the time being? And how, and Luz particularly was asking, were there any kind of financial education components that were rolled into this, and were some kind of financial capability goals being sought here? So that'll be us for the time being. Thanks.
Thanks, Joep. Over to Marjorie.
Okay, thank you very much. So from our group, there was an observation about the procurement method. So in terms of just comparing the procurement method versus the beneficiary choice method. So one observation is that from the procurement method, you can't, rather the beneficiary choice method, you can't demand a lot because it's beneficiary driven. But then one of the observations is that there is active competition for beneficiaries, and an example of Zambia was given where it was noted that there was an improvement in terms of the service that was being given to the beneficiaries. And of course, there was also an observation that the costs have come down since the program started. So in Zambia, the cost dropped from 50 kwacha to 35 kwacha. Then there was another interesting observation in Kenya about why maybe M-Pesa was not included. And then in terms of questions, there is a premise that banks want, okay, this is just an observation that there's a premise that banks want some of these customers, but then the question is that, is there a business case for banks? And how do you get them to service the vulnerable customers? Then apart from that, there was also a question around alternative models. So in this case, from the models that have been presented, it seems that beneficiaries are only able to access payments. But the question is, banks are allowed to offer other products, and can this model be useful? Is that kind of arrangement being considered in all the three countries? Then the other one is specifically about the Togo experience, although I think this relates maybe to other programs as well. So in these programs, we see that women are the ones who benefit the most. But due to social norms, if the women receive money, we find that in most of the research conducted, it's been found that sometimes they don't get to use the money themselves. Maybe it will be used by a man. So have there been any real advantages of providing more to the women as opposed to just opening it up to everyone? So these were basically the observations and questions from our group.
Fantastic, Marjorie. Over to Arisha, and keep it quick, Arisha.
You're on mute, Arisha.
Arisha, yeah, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so I'll start with the observations. Wendy pointed out that the Jewel program has actually been pretty successful in targeting women. It's one of those programs that's been pretty exemplary on designing for women as opposed to just putting women in the mission. As far as biometrics are concerned, there was an observation around who is it incumbent on? Is it incumbent on banks or the governments to make sure that the beneficiaries are authenticated using their biometrics in accurate ways? And finally, on empowerment, the main takeaway there was that providing beneficiaries with the choice on where and how to receive their benefits is the most important aspect of all of these programs. Looking at questions, and I'll do this pretty quickly. For Togo, there were questions by Mutale and Tricia on financial literacy in rural areas. How is this being managed? That was one. And two, on digital literacy, because a lot of this program, the program in Togo, has digitized payments. So how are they ensuring that beneficiaries are aware of what payments they're receiving, and how do they go on to use these? And finally, there was a question from Anurodh on whether there are any issues relating to beneficiaries receiving more than they're entitled to, and how do the algorithms reduce the incidence of that? We could pass it on to Emma.
Over to our French-speaking group, Emma Boali.
Merci, merci. Bonjour tout le monde. So in our group, we can say that we had discussions and questions and remarks around three main pillars. So first pillar was around digital literacy and financial literacy in general. So this is a question to the three panelists and covering the three countries is what kind of support is provided to customers to help them and guide them in cashing out and going through this journey of onboarding and at the end cashing out their money. The second pillar was around onboarding. So this is also addressed to Togo, but more broadly to the different panelists, is how to differentiate the enrollment between an individual and map it with the household in order to ensure that this household is not being paid double time. And the other question about onboarding was, what about people without biometric ID? What do we do? And another related question was, do we have a plan B? So if a recipient is not reached and not able to onboard and to register to the program, what do we do? What's the contingency plan? The third pillar was around the distribution. The availability, capillarity, and liquidity of the cash out points. So we would like to have some feedback about how distribution worked. And also for the three panelists to ask if there is a digital ecosystem where people can spend their money digitally directly from their wallet or bank account. And a specific question to Togo was, will the Novici program open to other players such as MFIs and banks in the perspective of enlarging the financial inclusion scope? And thank you very much to our French-speaking participants.
Well, so there are quite a few questions, and I'm going to turn it quickly back to our panelists and our guest speakers, and I'll come back and start with Togo. And I guess, you know, having heard a lot of this, I think the questions really focused on the recipients is one category, the beneficiaries, and the other was with the providers and how to procure. And I wonder whether, you know, beginning back with Ms. Ekohoho on Togo, what is the beneficiary experience? It's been rapid, but how have you been able to bring them into the system? And how have you dealt with people who don't have phones? Maybe start with the beneficiary question, and then also the questions around providers. How did you connect with the multiple mobile money providers, and is there a desire to open more of that in the future? So maybe 2 to 3 minutes, Ms. Ekohoho, please, on Togo.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Chen. So in terms of onboarding the beneficiaries, we actually did a lot of massive communication. We did communication on TV and on radio. And for the funny stories is that on day one, when we launched Novici, we had close to 3.4 million registration attempts, which causes the system to kind of jam or crash, meaning that we didn't actually do a lot of kind of communication before people started enrolling. That was due to I will say instant cash payment, because as people were registering and received their money, there was a kind of word of mouth going around. But we do realize that there's a kind of digital literacy things that is involved, and we know that we recognize that as a challenge. And as part of our digital transformation agenda, in order to kind of get people to use much more of digital solution, we are planning of two things. Is that developing a program that aims at educating people to use digital means, one, and the second one is developing a program that is that kind of, or developing a model to provide subsidize the mobile phone to rural community, especially the vulnerable people, because one of the issue in onboarding is that there has been a kind of exclusion for people that do not have a mobile phone number. However, we know that at least in every household, there is at least one phone number. Everybody do not have a phone number in that household, but at least one person has a phone number. And for those households, it was a strategic decision to get the woman to register, because the woman was, using the woman ID to register. So in terms of enrollment and onboarding, we just did, we communicated and people found their way to register actually. However, we are conscious that there is a kind of digital literacy program that needs to be run. In terms of providers, because we have two telcos, so it's kind of a quick connection. We just have two telcos, and we used to work with them. That was not the first time for Togo to deploy a digital cash transfer program. We already have an experience in 2016 where we were dispersing subsidies to farmers using mobile wallet so that they can get inputs, to increase their productivity. So that was not the first time. So it was just the same principle that has been applied in another, I will say in another context. I will say the main innovation here is using the USSD program, because there is no need for internet. Today in Togo, we have close to 91% coverage in terms of 3G. So at least with a feature phone, even with 2G, at least with a feature phone, you are able to register and get cash. No need for internet. So we had all those things. We kind of leverage. Leveraged on. In terms of so for service provider, it was really easy to connect to the mobile money. Then in terms of cash out points, after the Novice program, we kind of ran an impact evaluation. So after the program, we ran impact evaluation, and we noticed that 75% of people cashed out within 1 or 2 days when they received the money. And though we know that we do not have enough of mobile agent points, so it's also a part of our digital transformation program to find a way to increase the mobile money agent network, working together with the post office, who have actually the most branches in Togo. So those kind of challenges are taken into account. And there was also a question about identification, and that's right, because for any social program or digital program, it's kind of very important to kind of be able to uniquely identify people and link it to a household. In case of Novice, the social task was not aimed at a household, it was aimed at an individual. Now, when we consider that a household is made of a dad and a mom, and then a son, somebody that is more than 80 years old, when you combine the three, and then those three have a cell phone and they register, when you combine the money each of them get, it's close to the minimal wage in Togo, which is roughly $35,000, which is roughly 60. No, not 35,000 CFA, which is roughly $60. So, in future, we intend to leverage on the biometric ID system to be able to uniquely identify everybody and to link them to a household and connect that database and build what we call a unique social registry, so that when we have a unique ID of a person, we are able to have all the socio-economic information on that person and link him to a household and provide him with the adequate social help.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's great. There's a lot going on. I mean, it feels like you're quite confident that the phone side and the education can be overcome with using innovative USSD, so that not everybody has to have internet, that if you keep up the heavy communications program, and it's all linked to a broader agenda around the digital economy, which of course is the ministry where you sit. So you have a broader interest in seeing this move ahead. I will say on time, we're going to extend the webinar by 5 minutes so that we can actually get on and hear also some of the reactions from Zambia and Kenya. So I'm going to switch over to Zambia and Emma and ask a similar question. And I know you addressed it in some of your observations already, but maybe on the beneficiary side, clearly Jewel has moved a phone into the hands of all the beneficiaries in Jewel. But again, reminding people as it moves to this broader program, not everybody may have a phone, and you've decided to be more practical about keeping it in more densely populated areas as you expand to other programs. I wonder, maybe you can say a bit more about the procurement side on the beneficiaries, Emma, and sorry, on the PSPs, and what are the arrangements? How did you attract the PSPs to the program, and why are they incentivized to help you with this G2P program?
Sure. So I was just going to say that, you know, beneficiary choice and procurement are not mutually exclusive, you know. So for us in Jewel, it started, as I said, with not a formal procurement process, but actually memorandum of understanding with any interested payment service provider. So how that was working is, and how the payment service providers were incentivized is that basically the program pays their market-based withdrawal fees. So how it works is the program sends the payment and tops up the payment already with the withdrawal fee that the market-based withdrawal fee that the beneficiary is going to need to withdraw the payment. So there wasn't a kind of special arrangement where government is trying to negotiate a special fee or something like that. So that's obviously the incentive for the payment service provider, is that they are enrolling new beneficiaries in new areas where they weren't there before, and they're getting their market-based fees. The market-based fees themselves have reduced over time because of the competition. So as more payment service providers have joined in the last few years, for example, MTN coming in with much cheaper withdrawal fees, the others have been forced to you know, lower their fees as well. However, now for the social cash transfer, the implementers, you know, of the social cash transfer are different, and they've said, no, I mean, we don't want to pay the market-based fees because it's a much bigger caseload, it's much bigger program. So we don't want to pay that level. We want to negotiate with the PSP. So actually what is happening is, again, direct selection. So instead of going through a lengthy procurement process with competitive bidding, evaluation of technical proposals, etc., the government is directly selecting, again, all who are interested. So they go straight to the financial proposal, basically. So at least it short circuits that kind of 6 month or whatever of competitive bidding, and they go straight into the financial proposals and negotiating that, and then entering into a contract. And still using beneficiary choice. So the actual beneficiaries that are going to be allocated to each PSP will still be decided upon based on beneficiary choice, even though government is entering into a formal contract. So I think to the colleague that was saying, I mean, how do we make sure that certain service levels are adhered to? You know, for the Jewel, we were relying on the service standards of the Bank of Zambia, you know, the usual service standards that the PSPs have to adhere to. But now that with the social cash transfer, we might, you know, the government might want to add something over and above that the PSPs, you know, for example, are going to provide sensitization or whatever. So I think there is an opportunity there as well.
Thank you so much, Emma. It's a fascinating and case that is still fairly unique anywhere, and especially on the continent. Let me turn to our last set of questions over to Victor about Kenya. And Victor, I think there's a lot of questions, and please feel free to address questions on, you know, the beneficiaries, and particularly I think there's an interesting question about whether this program has contributed more broadly to financial inclusion, given the amount of time that it's been in place. And I think there's a related question on the provider side, Victor. Why isn't M-Pesa involved, or how is M-Pesa involved? We're not using mobile operators directly in the Inua Jamii program. Maybe you could clarify that matter for our audience here.
Okay, thank you very much, Greg. So let me just start with the issue of biometrics. I just wanted to mention that, yes, there has been a lot of should I say, the pro and against biometrics, but we have used biometrics now for about 10 years. And we have found them to be reliable in terms of identifying beneficiaries and also confirming that the beneficiary is alive. Obviously, the issue of whether a bank should be confirming aliveness is a separate issue, and it is more actually the government's responsibility. But in some cases, the government chooses to contract out or to outsource that. In terms of the models, we prefer to use ISO standards, or we are pushing for adoption of ISO standards as well as EMVCo standards, so that we can drive towards interoperability at the biometric level. There was a question about fees. The beneficiary actually receives 2 free withdrawals. So that is, it's free to the beneficiary, but paid for by the government every 2 months. Procurement was actually very difficult, but for a different reason. It was because of the procurement guidelines in Kenya. They specify that you should take the lowest bidder, the best technical and the lowest financially. So the ministry had to obtain a special dispensation from the Procurement Oversight Authority to be able to procure these 4 banks. In terms of interest, there are 42 banks in Kenya, 19 were very interested. So the interest was there and they received over 10 bids. And out of those 10 bids, these 4 were selected. In terms of financial inclusion, this is front and center for what we do, especially FSD Kenya. And this is part of the reason why we were advocating for a full bank account, so that these beneficiaries would not have these prepaid cards where they simply used to go and cash out. And in many cases, they used to be encouraged to take all the money at once. So it was more like just take, swipe the card and take the money, to a bank account where now we tell them they can come after 6 months and the funds will still be there. They can bank their own funds into this account. They can receive funds from other NGOs, from even their relatives, et cetera, et cetera. So in terms of financial inclusion, that has been a key pillar of the Inua Jamii program. They also get a free debit card and free bank statements, et cetera. And this is all paid through the funds that are transferred by the government. In terms of M-Pesa, and I would rather talk more about mobile money, we have had discussions with mobile money. And what we identified as the best model was for these bank account, we call it the Inua Jamii bank account, to be integrated with mobile money through a mobile banking app or even through USSD. So all our beneficiaries can pull money from their bank account into their mobile money wallet, and from there, they are able to spend. So somebody asks, is it possible to do cashless procurement? Yes, we have over 165,000 M-Pesa merchants at the last count, and a beneficiary can pull the money into their mobile money wallet and then spend the money from there. There was a question about costs. Costs have been coming down. So many years ago, when we started our program in Northern Kenya, we were paying almost $5 per transaction. Today, it's about $1.50 in the remotest part of Kenya, and about $1 in the urban centers. I think I've responded to most of the issues, unless I've missed
Fantastic, Victor.
Thank you. Thank you.
No. Listen, there's obviously lots of conversation we could have. We really wanted to highlight, 3 countries where CGAP has just learned an enormous amount by asking experts like the 3 guests that we've had here today about some of the real innovations that are happening. And let me say, these are innovations not only relevant in the African continent, but abroad. There are lots of countries outside of Africa that are paying attention to what's happening here and some of the innovations. So I really want to particularly thank everyone for joining, and for my colleagues for helping me pull this together, and particularly our 3 guests who are real experts on what I think we'd all have to say are 3 really fascinating, innovative examples. And so we hope you got something out of it. There's more written about this in case studies and other things. So we hope as a follow-up, you might go find some of that. And with that, I want to say thank you on behalf of CGAP to all of you for joining. And hope this is the beginning of more such conversations. Thank you.